"I'll make you walk in exchange for a warm house," said the beggar to the rich man in the wheelchair. Harrison Sterling watched through the glass window of his mansion the harshest winter he had ever seen. At 52, the successful businessman had been confined to his wheelchair for 3 long years, after an accident that changed his life forever. His fortune remained intact, but his soul was as frozen as the snow covering the garden outside. That's when he saw the small silhouette approaching the main gate. A boy no more than 12 years old, wearing tattered clothes and a worn wool cap, struggled through the deep snow. When the boy came close to the window and saw him, he did something Harrison would never forget. "Sir," said the boy, his voice trembling from the cold but firm in determination, "I'll make you walk in exchange for a warm house." Harrison nearly choked on the coffee he was drinking. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. He pressed the intercom button connected to the gate. "What did you say, boy?" "I said I can make you walk again," repeated the boy, his teeth chattering from the cold. "If you let me stay in a warm house, I'll cure you." The businessman let out a bitter laugh. 3 years of physical therapy with the best specialists in the United States, expensive treatments abroad, renowned doctors, and now a street kid thought he could do what no professional had managed. "You're crazy, boy. Get out of here before I call security." But the boy didn't move. On the contrary, he came closer to the window and placed his little frozen hands on the glass. "My name is Caleb. My grandmother was a physical therapist before she passed. She taught me everything about muscles and nerves. You don't walk because you don't want to walk, not because you can't." Harrison felt a shiver run down his spine. How could that boy know something like that? The doctors had said exactly that several times, that there was no physical injury to justify his condition. "You know nothing about me," retorted Harrison, but his voice no longer sounded so convinced. "I know you're at this window every day at 3 in the afternoon," said Caleb, wiping his nose with the torn sleeve of his shirt. "I know the grey-haired lady who works here brings coffee always at the same time. And I know you look at this street like someone waiting for someone who never comes." Harrison's heart raced. How was it possible that a child had been observing him for so long without him noticing? "How long have you been watching me?" 3 weeks, Caleb answered honestly. "Since it started getting really cold. I stay in the alcove of that building over there." He pointed to an abandoned building across the street. "When it rains, when it snows, I stay there. And you're always at this window." Harrison looked in the indicated direction, and there was indeed a small alcove between the steps of an abandoned construction site. How had he not noticed someone lived there? "Why don't you look for a shelter, an institution to take care of you?" "Because I've tried." Caleb's voice grew quieter. "They want to separate me from what's left of my grandmother, and I promised her I would help people who suffered what she suffered." "What did your grandmother suffer?" "She was also in a wheelchair after falling down the stairs, but she healed herself using exercises she invented herself. She taught me everything before she left." Harrison felt something stir in his chest, a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time. Mrs. Hattie, his housekeeper, appeared at the office door with a worried expression. "Mr. Harrison, there's been a boy at the gate for over 20 minutes. Do you want me to call someone to remove him?" "No, Hattie, let him in." "Sir, you heard me right. Bring him inside before he freezes." Mrs. Hattie hesitated, but she had known her employer long enough to know when not to question his decisions. A few minutes later, she returned, accompanied by the boy, who left small puddles of melted snow along the way. Up close, Harrison could see that Caleb was even thinner than he appeared. His brown eyes shone with an intelligence that contrasted with his ragged appearance. His clothes were not only torn, but also dirty, as if he had truly been living on the streets for a long time. "Sit there," said Harrison, pointing to an armchair near the fireplace. "Hattie, bring him some hot chocolate." "Thank you very much, sir," said Caleb, but instead of sitting down immediately, he stood still, watching Harrison carefully. "What are you looking at?" "Your legs," Caleb replied without embarrassment. "Can I touch them?" "No." The answer came out sharper than Harrison intended. "I mean, why do you want to do that?" "Because I need to feel where the problem is. My grandmother always said that legs hold the memory of trauma. If I can find where that memory is hidden, I can help release it." Harrison had never heard anything like that. It was completely different from everything the doctors had said over the past 3 years. Was your grandmother a licensed physical therapist? She was, but she said schools only teach about the body, never about the body's soul. The body's soul? Yes. She said when something very sad happens, the body sometimes decides to protect itself by stopping its function, not because it's broken, but because it's afraid of getting hurt again. Harrison felt a lump in his throat. That made a disturbing kind of sense. His accident hadn't just been an accident. It had been the moment he discovered that his partner and best friend, Vincent, had spent 3 years stealing money from the company and blaming innocent employees. Mrs. Hattie returned with the hot chocolate and a plate of cookies. Caleb thanked her politely, but Harrison noticed he held the cup more to warm himself than to drink. "Caleb, answer me one thing honestly. Do you really believe you can help me?" The boy stopped drinking the chocolate and looked directly into Harrison's eyes. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know if I can make you walk, but I know I can make you want to walk again. And my grandmother always said that was the hardest part." "How do you know my name?" "It's written on the gate plaque," Caleb replied with a shy smile, "and also because Mrs. Hattie said it when she answered the intercom yesterday." Harrison felt slightly embarrassed for not realizing the boy had been observing him for so long, but there was something in Caleb's sincerity that touched him deeply. "All right. You can stay here tonight. It's too cold for you to sleep on the street. But tomorrow we'll talk about this making me walk business. Can I start now?" "Start what?" "The exercises. My grandmother said the longer the body's soul stays asleep, the harder it is to wake it up." Harrison looked at Mrs. Hattie, who just shrugged. He himself didn't understand why he was considering this seriously. "All right, but only for a few minutes, and if I feel any pain, you stop immediately." Caleb nodded and quickly finished his hot chocolate. Then, to everyone's surprise, he took off his wet shoes and stood barefoot. "I need to feel the floor for balance," he explained. "Now, sir, can I touch your legs?" Harrison took a deep breath and nodded. Caleb knelt beside the wheelchair and placed his small, cold hands on Harrison's knees. The businessman braced himself to feel nothing, as always happened when the physical therapists touched him. But something different happened. Caleb's hands didn't go straight for the muscles or joints. Instead, they rested still on Harrison's knees, as if they were simply listening. "Your legs are scared," said Caleb after a few moments. "They remember a great pain, not in the legs, but in the heart." Harrison felt tears forming in his eyes. How was it possible that a child could perceive something that dozens of doctors could not? "They think that if they don't move, the pain won't come back," continued Caleb, "but the pain is already here inside." He gently touched Harrison's chest. "It doesn't matter if the legs move or not." "How do you know that?" "Because I also locked away a part of myself when my grandma passed away," replied Caleb. "I stopped speaking for 2 months. I thought if I didn't talk about her leaving, maybe it wouldn't be true." "And how did you start speaking again?" "One day I met an older man who was also sad. When I told him about my grandma, I realized that talking about her didn't make her leave more. In fact, it made her feel closer." Caleb began making very gentle movements on Harrison's legs, but different from any technique he had ever tried. Instead of forcing the muscles to move, it seemed like he was trying to talk to them. "What happened on the day you stopped walking?" asked Caleb as he worked. Harrison hesitated. He had never told the full truth to anyone, not even the doctors. "I found out my best friend had been stealing from me for years," he said finally. "That same day I fell down the stairs trying to run after him to confront him. But it wasn't the fall that made you stop walking, was it?" "How do you know?" "Because my grandma told me about people who stop walking on the inside before they stop on the outside. You had already stopped trusting people. Then your body decided to stop carrying you to places where you could get hurt again." Harrison fell silent, absorbing those words. It made so much sense it was frightening. "But if that's the case, how can you help me? I can't just decide to trust people again." "You don't have to trust everyone," said Caleb, pausing his movements. "You can start by trusting me. I have nothing to steal from you. I just want a warm house and the chance to help someone like my grandma did." Harrison looked at the boy kneeling beside his chair. There was something pure in the dedication with which Caleb worked, expecting nothing more than warmth and food. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay, at least until winter passes." Caleb smiled for the first time since he arrived, and Harrison felt something move in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Mrs. Hattie, who had observed everything in silence, approached. "Mr. Harrison, I'll prepare the guest room for the boy." "Thank you, Hattie. And prepare a hot bath as well. Caleb needs to warm up properly." "Sir," said Caleb hesitantly, "can I continue the exercises tomorrow?" "Of course, but now you need to take care of yourself. You can't take care of anyone if you're sick." Caleb nodded and followed Mrs. Hattie to the room. Harrison was left alone in his study, looking at his own legs with a strange feeling. For a moment, he could have sworn he felt a tingling in his toes. That night, Harrison took a long time to fall asleep. He kept thinking about the conversation with Caleb and how the boy had touched wounds he thought were well hidden. It was disturbing and comforting at the same time. The next morning he woke earlier than usual and went to the kitchen for breakfast. Caleb was already there, helping Mrs. Hattie prepare the coffee. The boy had bathed and was wearing clean clothes the housekeeper had set aside. They were old clothes of Harrison's from when he was younger. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," said Caleb cheerfully. "Mrs. Hattie let me help with breakfast." "Good morning, Caleb. Did you sleep well?" "It was the best night's sleep of my life," replied the boy. "I dreamed about my grandma. She said she's proud of me." Harrison felt his heart tighten. Caleb's innocence reminded him of a time when he himself believed people were inherently good. "Caleb, tell me more about your grandmother. How did you live?" "She had a small clinic in Hope Valley," said Caleb, serving the coffee. "She treated people who didn't have much money, so we never got rich. But she said true wealth was seeing people walk again." "And how did you manage financially?" "She did some extra work, took care of elderly people on weekends. I helped, stayed with her when she treated patients. That's how I learned about the body's soul." "Did your grandmother ever try to send you to school?" "She tried, but I couldn't bear to be away from her. I was too afraid something would happen when I wasn't around." Caleb stopped stirring his coffee and looked at Harrison. "Just like you're afraid to get out of that chair." Harrison was impressed by the boy's perception. "It's true. I'm afraid to try to walk and discover I really can't. My grandmother said it's better to try and find out you can't than to never try and always wonder." Mrs. Hattie served breakfast and the three of them talked about simple things: the weather, plans for the day, each one's favorite recipes. Harrison couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a relaxed conversation during a meal. "Caleb," said Harrison after coffee, "today we'll try the exercises again, but I want you to explain to me exactly what you're doing." "Of course. My grandmother always said the patient needs to understand the treatment to be able to help." They went to the office, where Harrison always spent his days. Caleb asked him to move to a more comfortable armchair, where he could move his legs more freely. "First thing," said Caleb, kneeling again, "is to find where the memory of the trauma is. Every muscle holds different memories." He began by gently touching different points on Harrison's legs, observing the reactions closely. "Here," he said, touching the right thigh, "this part remembers the moment you decided to run after your friend." Harrison felt a shiver. How was that possible? "And here," he touched the left knee, "it remembers the anger you felt when you discovered the truth." "How can you know that?" "My grandmother taught me to feel. Every emotion leaves a different mark on the body. Anger hardens the muscles, sadness makes them weak, fear makes them tremble inside." Caleb continued mapping Harrison's legs, identifying different memories in each region. It was as if he could read the story of the accident through touch. "Now let's talk to each part," said Caleb. "I'll touch, and you'll remember that day, but this time knowing you're safe here." "I don't know if I can—" "My grandmother said healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering without feeling fear." Harrison took a deep breath and nodded. Caleb placed his hands on the right thigh and asked him to remember the moment he decided to confront Vincent. "I was in the office," Harrison began. "I had just discovered he had forged my signature on several contracts. I felt an anger I had never felt before in my life. Go on, encouraged Caleb, making gentle circular motions. But now remember knowing that you are safe in your home, with people who care about you. Harrison continued recounting what happened, but this time without the anguish he always felt when remembering that day. As he spoke, he began to feel a strange sensation in his legs, as if something that was locked up began to loosen. Now the knee part, said Caleb, changing the position of his hands. Remember the anger, but this time knowing that anger won't control your legs. The exercise continued for nearly an hour, with Caleb working on each memory he had identified. In the end, Harrison felt emotionally exhausted, but also lighter than he had felt in years. Can you move your toes? Asked Caleb. Harrison tried without much expectation. To his surprise, he felt a subtle movement in his left foot. I did it, he exclaimed, his eyes filled with tears. I moved it. It's just the beginning, Caleb smiled, but your legs are already starting to remember they can trust you again. Mrs. Hattie, who had watched part of the session from the doorway, approached with her eyes also misty. Mr. Harrison, in 3 years of physical therapy, I've never seen you move your feet like that. It's because we were only treating the body, explained Caleb. But the problem was never in the body. It was in the body's soul. That day, Harrison felt more hopeful than he had in a long time. During lunch, he called his daughter Sarah, who lived in another city, to tell her about the progress. Dad, are you sure this boy isn't fooling you? Asked Sarah, worried. How can you trust a complete stranger? Sarah, in 3 years, no doctor could get me to move even my toes. And today I did. But Dad, it could be a coincidence, or even suggestion. You need to be careful with people who take advantage of others' vulnerability. Harrison understood his daughter's concern, but something inside him said Caleb was different. There was a purity in the boy's intentions that was impossible to fake. Honey, I'll be careful, but I'm also going to give a chance to someone who might actually be able to help me. After the conversation with Sarah, Harrison felt a little shaken. What if she was right? What if Caleb was just a very smart boy trying to take advantage of his situation? These doubts were interrupted when Caleb appeared in the office with a glass of water. Mr. Harrison, I noticed you got sad after the phone call. Was it your daughter? How did you... My grandma used to say that when someone we love doesn't believe in what we're doing, our body feels it and can set back the progress. Harrison was once again impressed by the boy's perception. My daughter is worried about me. She thinks you might be trying to fool me. She's right to be worried, said Caleb. On the streets, I met many people who do bad things to people who are suffering, but you can test if I'm telling the truth. How? Let me stay just 1 more week. If I can't get you to move your whole legs in that time, I'll leave and never come back. I won't ask for anything, not food, not money, not a place to stay. I just want the chance to prove I can help. Harrison looked into Caleb's eyes and saw only sincerity. A con artist would never make an offer like that. All right, 1 week. But I want you to know you don't have to prove anything. If the exercises don't work, you can still stay. I won't let you go back to the streets in the middle of winter. Caleb smiled and approached Harrison's armchair. Can we do the afternoon session? Of course. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. This second session was different from the first. Caleb focused on working with the memories that had been awakened in the morning, helping them integrate with positive sensations. Now we're going to teach your legs that moving can bring good things, he explained. Instead of just remembering the run to confront your friend, let's remember all the times your legs took you to happy places. How so? Tell me about the first time your legs took you to someone you loved. Harrison thought for a moment. When I was 6 years old, I ran through the park to hug my mother after she returned from a trip. Perfect, said Caleb, gently massaging the right thigh. Now, while I work here, you remember that happy run. Your legs will start to associate movement with joy again. The exercise continued with Harrison remembering other happy occasions. When he ran to hug Sarah on the day she was born, when he danced at his wedding, when he walked along the beach on his honeymoon. With each positive memory, Harrison felt more movement returning to his legs. By the end of the session, he could move not only his toes, but also his ankles. "Unbelievable," he murmured, watching his own feet move. 3 years. 3 years without being able to move anything. And now... "You were ready to improve," said Caleb. "You just needed someone to remind your legs how to be happy again." That night, during dinner, Mrs. Hattie commented on the transformation she was seeing in Harrison. "Sir, I've worked in this house for 3 years, and I've never seen you smile as much as I did today." "It's true, Hattie. I had forgotten what it's like to have hope." "Mrs. Hattie," said Caleb, "Mr. Harrison is going to need foods that help muscles get stronger. My grandmother always said that healing comes from within and without." "What kind of food?" "Dark leafy greens, lean proteins, fruits with vitamin C. Mr. Harrison might have more of an appetite in the coming days because his body is going to start working harder." And indeed, Harrison noticed his hunger had increased. It was as if his body was waking from a long sleep and needed energy to function again. On the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. Harrison was doing his morning exercises with Caleb when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Hattie went to answer it and returned a few minutes later with a tense expression. "Mr. Harrison, there's a man at the door who says he's your former business partner." "Vincent Thorne." Harrison's blood ran cold. Immediately his legs, which had been improving each day, became completely rigid again. "No," he said. "Tell him I'm not here." "Sir," insisted Mrs. Hattie, "he said it's an urgent matter about the company, something about documents only you can sign." Caleb immediately noticed the change in Harrison's body. "Sir, your legs have locked up again," he said, concerned. "The fear has returned." "I can't see him, Caleb." "Not after everything he did." "But if you don't see him, you'll always be afraid of him. My grandmother said we only overcome what we face." Harrison knew Caleb was right, but he felt terrified just thinking about being in the same room as Vincent. "What if I lock up again? What if all the progress is lost?" "It won't be," said Caleb with conviction, "because now your legs know they can move. They won't forget that." After a few minutes of hesitation, Harrison asked Mrs. Hattie to bring Vincent to the office. Caleb remained by his side, silent, but his presence was comforting. Vincent entered the office with a false smile and a folder of documents under his arm. He was a tall man with graying hair, wearing an expensive suit. Harrison hadn't seen him in 3 years, but the anger and feeling of betrayal returned instantly. "Harrison, my old friend," said Vincent, feigning casualness. "How are you?" "I heard that." "Stop it," interrupted Harrison. "We are not friends." "You know very well why we are not friends." Vincent looked at Caleb with suspicion. "Who is this boy? Can we speak in private?" "He stays," said Harrison firmly, "and just say what you want. I have no intention of prolonging this conversation." All right," said Vincent, opening the folder. "Look, Harrison, I know we had some differences in the past, but now an opportunity has come up that could be good for both of us." "What kind of opportunity?" "An international investor is interested in buying our company. The offer is generous, but it requires the signatures of both partners to be valid." Harrison looked suspiciously at the papers Vincent had placed on the table. "What company, Vincent? You destroyed our partnership 3 years ago when you started stealing money and forging my signature." "Those were misunderstandings, Harrison. I can explain everything." "You don't need to explain anything. I saw the evidence. I saw the forged documents." Caleb, who had remained silent until then, approached the table where the papers were. "Can I see?" he asked innocently. "It's none of your business, kid," said Vincent sharply. "Let him see," said Harrison. "Caleb has a very good sense about people." Caleb took the documents and began to leaf through them. Even though he was just a child, he had spent enough time on the streets to develop a sharp instinct for lies and scam attempts. "Mr. Harrison," said Caleb after a few minutes, "these papers are strange." "How so?" "Look at the date here." He pointed to a part of the document. "It says the proposal was made last week, but look at this signature down here." He pointed to another spot. "The ink looks older." Harrison took the papers and looked more closely. Caleb was right. There were clear inconsistencies in the documents. "Vincent, are these documents fake?" Of course not, protested Vincent, but his expression had changed. This boy knows nothing about business. You can't take what he says seriously. Actually, said Caleb calmly, I learned a lot about business living on the street. I learned that when someone is desperate for you to sign something quickly, it's usually because something is wrong. Vincent looked visibly uncomfortable. Harrison, are you going to believe a street kid over me? We've been partners for over 20 years. You stopped being my partner the day you decided to betray me, said Harrison, feeling a strength growing inside him. And yes, I will believe him, because unlike you, he has never lied to me. Harrison felt something extraordinary happen. The anger he felt toward Vincent, instead of locking his legs as it always did, was giving strength to them. It was as if all the energy that had been trapped for 3 years had finally found an outlet. Vincent, said Harrison, focusing on the sensations in his legs, I want you to leave my house, now. Harrison, you're making a mistake. This proposal could make us millionaires. Us. Harrison felt an incredible sensation in his thighs. There is no more us. And as for being a millionaire, I already am. What I am no longer is a person who trusts you. To everyone's surprise, especially his own, Harrison began to rise from the chair. Not completely, but enough to be half leaning, half standing. Vincent stood with his mouth open. Caleb smiled proudly. Mrs. Hattie, who had entered the office to serve coffee, dropped the tray in shock. You're standing, stammered Vincent. I am, said Harrison, leaning on the arms of the chair but managing to keep his legs steady. And for the first time in 3 years, I feel strong enough to tell you in person, get out of my life. Vincent left the office quickly, clearly disturbed by what he had witnessed. Harrison sat back down in the chair, exhausted but triumphant. I did it, he said to Caleb. I managed to stand up. You didn't just manage to stand up, said Caleb. You managed to face your fear. Now your legs know they can carry you away from trouble, not just toward it. That afternoon, Harrison managed to stand for almost 5 minutes straight. It was extraordinary progress for just 3 days of treatment. During dinner, Harrison was visibly emotional. Caleb, I need to thank you. In 3 days you achieved something I thought was impossible. I didn't do anything, Mr. Harrison. I just helped you remember that your legs never stopped working. They were just scared. How can I repay you? You already are, Caleb smiled. You gave me a warm house, good food, and a chance to help someone. It's all I asked for. But you deserve more than that. You deserve an education, a real family. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Mr. Harrison, can I confess something? Of course. I never had a real family, just me and my grandmother. When she passed, I thought I'd be alone forever. But here, with you and Mrs. Hattie, for the first time, I feel like I'm part of something. Harrison felt his eyes fill with tears. Caleb, you don't need to feel like you're part. You are part. If you want, this can be your real home. Forever. Really? Really? We'll arrange all the documents so you can study, have a normal life. But if you want to keep helping me with the exercises, it would be an honor. Caleb threw himself into Harrison's arms, crying with joy. It was the first time in 2 years he felt truly safe. In the following days, Harrison's progress continued to accelerate. By the end of the first week, he could stand for almost 15 minutes and take a few steps supported by a cane. That's when Sarah arrived unexpectedly for a visit. Dad, I needed to see it with my own eyes, she said, entering the study and finding Harrison standing by the window. The doctors said it was impossible. Honey, there's someone I want you to meet, said Harrison, pointing to Caleb, who was organizing some books on the shelf. This is Caleb. He's the one who helped me walk again. Sarah looked suspiciously at the boy. Dad, we need to talk. In private. Harrison asked Caleb to go help Mrs. Hattie in the kitchen. As soon as they were alone, Sarah exploded. Dad, have you lost your mind? Letting a street kid live in your house? You know nothing about him, his family, what he might be planning. Sarah, this boy saved my life. He could be manipulating you. There are organized groups that train kids to get close to rich, vulnerable people. Your daughter is also right to be worried, said a voice behind them. They turned and saw Caleb standing in the doorway, his eyes sad. Caleb, Harrison began. "No, Mr. Harrison. Your daughter has reason to be suspicious. On the streets there really are kids who do that, and I can't prove I'm not one of them." Sarah crossed her arms, satisfied to be heard. "But I can prove one thing," Caleb continued. "I can prove that you're better with me than you were without me, and if that ever changes, I'll leave on my own." "Caleb, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," said Harrison, leaning on his cane to approach the boy. "Yes, I do," said Caleb, "because if your daughter doesn't trust me, she'll always be worried. And when the people we love are worried about our treatments, the treatments stop working." Sarah was surprised by the maturity of the response. "What do you propose?" she asked. "Let me stay 2 more weeks. If at the end of that time your father isn't walking on his own without a cane, I'll leave and never come back. I won't take anything from the house, or ask for money, or cause any trouble. And if he is walking, then you decide if you still think I'm dangerous for him." Sarah looked at her father, who was clearly torn between supporting Caleb and not contradicting his daughter. "All right," she said finally. 2 weeks, but I'm staying here to observe everything." "Perfect," smiled Caleb. "That way you can learn the exercises too. It will be useful when I'm no longer here." That night, Sarah had a long conversation with Mrs. Hattie about Caleb. "Hattie, tell me honestly, do you think this boy is trying to deceive my father?" "Miss Sarah, I've worked with your father for 3 years. I've seen him try every possible treatment, spend fortunes on famous doctors, submit to experimental therapies. Nothing worked. And in 1 week with this boy, your father has started smiling again, has regained hope, and most importantly, he has started walking again. If this is a scam, it's the best scam in history. But what if he's just faking the results, manipulating my father psychologically? Miss, your father managed to stand up in front of Mr. Vincent, that man who caused all your father's trauma. There is no manipulation that can make a person paralyzed for 3 years stand up at the moment they most need strength." Sarah grew thoughtful. That really did make sense. The next day, she decided to observe Caleb's methods more closely. To her surprise, there was nothing mystical or questionable about the techniques the boy used. It was an intelligent combination of physical therapy, emotional therapy, and a lot of patience. "How did you learn all this?" she asked during a session. "My grandmother taught me," Caleb replied, "but I also learned a lot on the street. I met many people who suffered different traumas. Each one taught me something about how the body reacts to suffering." "What kind of traumas?" "People who stopped speaking after losing someone, people who stopped eating after going hungry, people who stopped trusting after being betrayed. The body has many ways to protect itself when life hurts too much." Sarah began to understand that Caleb wasn't just an intuitive child, but someone who had lived enough to develop a deep understanding of human suffering. "You've suffered a lot too, haven't you?" "I have," admitted Caleb. "But my grandmother always said that suffering can be a school or a prison. It depends on what we do with it." During the second week, Harrison made even more impressive progress. He could walk all around the house with only the support of a cane, go up and down stairs, and even go out for short walks in the garden. Sarah could no longer deny the effectiveness of Caleb's treatment, but she still had fears about the boy's intentions. "Caleb," she said one afternoon, "why do you care so much about my father? You barely know him." "Miss Sarah, when I lived on the street, many people passed by me every day. Some ignored me, others treated me badly, some gave me charity out of pity. And my father? Your father was different. Every afternoon when he sat at that window, I saw in his eyes the same sadness I felt. He was lost just like I was. Lost people need to help each other." "But why didn't you seek help from other houses?" "Because the other people who passed by me weren't really lost. They just had problems. Your father was truly lost, just like me." Sarah began to understand that the connection between Caleb and her father went far beyond a simple exchange of favors. It was a mutual recognition of wounded souls who found in each other the possibility of healing. On the 10th day of the second week, something happened that no one expected. Harrison was doing his morning exercises when he tripped and fell. The fall wasn't serious, but it was enough to awaken all the fears he thought he had overcome. I knew it, he said, sitting on the office floor. I knew it was too good to be true. My legs are still weak. I'm going to fall again, and again, and again. Caleb knelt beside him. Mr. Harrison, everyone falls. People who have always walked also fall. But I'm not like everyone else. I'm someone who hasn't walked for 3 years. That's true, Caleb said calmly. You're someone who couldn't walk for 3 years and still managed to get back up. That makes you stronger, not weaker. What if I fall again? Then we get up again. What if I can't get up? Then I'll stay here on the floor with you until we can get up together. Harrison looked at Caleb and saw the boy was serious. There was an unconditional loyalty in those brown eyes that touched him deeply. Will you help me up? Always. With Caleb's help, Harrison stood up and continued the exercises. The fall, instead of representing a setback, became an important lesson. Healing didn't mean never having problems again, but having the strength to overcome them. Sarah, who had witnessed the entire scene, finally understood the depth of the bond between her father and Caleb. Caleb, she said that afternoon, I owe you an apology. Why, ma'am? Because I thought you were here out of self-interest, but now I understand you're here out of love. Love? Yes. You love my father, not as a son, not as a grandson, but as someone who recognizes a part of themselves in him. Caleb was moved by Sarah's words. I never knew much about family love, he said, but I know that when I see your father happy, I'm happy too. And when I see him sad, I'm sad too. If that's love, then yes, I love him. And he loves you too, Sarah smiled. I saw it in the way he looks at you. It's the same way he looked at me when I was little. On the 15th day, the moment of truth arrived. Harrison was to walk alone without a cane to prove the treatment had worked completely. The whole family gathered in the mansion's garden. Harrison, Sarah, Mrs. Hattie, and Caleb. Winter was coming to an end, and the first signs of spring were beginning to appear. Father, said Sarah, don't worry if you can't do it. We're already proud of all the progress you've made. Mr. Harrison, said Caleb, your legs know how to walk. You just need to trust them. Harrison took a deep breath, handed the cane to Mrs. Hattie and took the first step, then the second, then the third, and he continued walking through the garden, alone, unaided, with firm and steady steps. Everyone cried with emotion. It was a moment that had seemed impossible just 2 weeks before. I did it, said Harrison, stopping in the middle of the garden and opening his arms. I can walk again. Caleb ran to him and threw himself into his arms. Sarah and Mrs. Hattie also came close for a group hug. Caleb, said Harrison, you've kept your part of the bargain. Now it's my turn to keep mine. You already have, Caleb smiled. You gave me the warmest home I could have asked for. No, I owe you much more than that. Harrison knelt in front of Caleb, coming eye level with the boy. Caleb, do you want to be my son, officially, legally, forever? Caleb was speechless for a few seconds. Really? Really. Sarah, what do you think about having a younger brother? I think it would be the best thing that could happen to our family, said Sarah, kneeling as well. Caleb, will you accept being my brother? Caleb looked at the 3 adults around him, offering something he had never imagined having, a complete family. I accept, he said, crying with joy. I accept being a son, a brother, a grandson. I accept being part of this family. And so, Caleb ceased to be a street boy in search of a warm home, and became a beloved son in search of nothing more, because he had finally found everything. In the months that followed, Harrison fully returned to his activities. He resumed control of the company, prosecuted Vincent for the crimes he had committed, and dedicated himself to raising Caleb as his son. The boy was enrolled in the best school in town, but he continued doing the exercises with Harrison every morning. Not because he needed it anymore, but because both had discovered that those moments of connection were too precious to be abandoned. Caleb also began helping other people in the community who faced problems similar to those Harrison had faced. With proper medical supervision, he developed a unique therapy method that combined physical and emotional techniques. You know what's most amazing, said Harrison one evening as they had a family dinner. Caleb offered me the ability to walk in exchange for a warm home. But in the end, he gained much more than a home, and I gained much more than the ability to walk." "What did you gain, Dad?" asked Sarah. "I gained a son. I gained the reminder that kindness still exists in the world, and I gained the certainty that no matter how lost we are, there's always hope of finding our way back." "And I gained a family," said Caleb. "And I learned that sometimes, when we offer help to someone, we are actually asking for help too." "I thought I was saving Mr. Harrison, but in truth we saved each other." Mrs. Hattie served dessert with teary eyes. "In 40 years working in different homes, I've never seen a transformation like this. This house was cold for 3 years, even with all the money in the world. And now it's the warmest house I know." And it truly was. The mansion that was once silent and melancholic had transformed into a home full of laughter, conversation, and plans for the future. Harrison and Caleb continued to be an inseparable pair. The businessman taught the boy about business, education, and responsibility. The boy taught the businessman about hope, simplicity, and the value of small joys. Sarah became the older sister Caleb never had, protecting and guiding him in adapting to family life. And Caleb became the younger brother she had always wanted, bringing a new and refreshing perspective to her life about what truly matters. 2 years later, on a winter afternoon, similar to the one when they first met, Harrison and Caleb were in the garden watching the snow fall. "Caleb," said Harrison, "do you regret trading your freedom for a family?" "Dad," answered Caleb. He had started calling Harrison Dad a few months after the adoption. "I never had freedom on the streets. I only had hunger, cold, and fear. Here I have real freedom, the freedom to dream, to learn, to grow." "And you, Dad?" continued Caleb. "Do you regret trading your loneliness for the responsibility of having a son?" "My son," smiled Harrison. "Loneliness was never a choice. It was a prison. You didn't take my loneliness away, you freed me from it." They stayed a few minutes in silence, appreciating the snow and reflecting on the journey they had taken together. "Dad," said Caleb eventually, "if one day you find another lost boy like I was, would you help him too?" "Without a doubt," answered Harrison. "In fact, I've been thinking about creating a program to help street children. With your experience and my business knowledge, we could make a real difference." "Really? Could we help other boys find families?" "And other families to find children," smiled Harrison. "There is a lot of lost love in the world, Caleb. People who want to give love but don't know to whom, and people who need to receive love but don't know where to find it. And that's how the project that would change the lives of hundreds of children in the following years was born. Harrison and Caleb created an organization that connected families willing to adopt with children who needed a home, but they did it in a unique way, using emotional therapies to heal both the children and the families before the adoption. "You know what I learned from you, Caleb?" said Harrison in one of the project's first meetings. "That sometimes people don't just need material help. They need someone who recognizes in them a spark of dignity and worth. And I learned from you, Dad, that kindness has no price, but it has value. And that a family isn't made of DNA, it's made of love and choice." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the organization created by Harrison and Caleb became a success. In 3 years, they helped over 200 children find loving families, and over 200 families find the children they were looking for. But the work wasn't easy. Many children arrived with deep trauma, just as Caleb had, and many families arrived with unrealistic expectations about adoption. "Dad," said Caleb one afternoon, after a particularly difficult day working with a child who refused to trust any adult, "sometimes I wonder if we're really helping, or if we're just reopening wounds that were already healing." "Caleb, do you remember how you felt before coming to our home?" "Of course, I felt like I would never have a family again, that I would never feel safe again. And now? Now I know I will always have a family, and I will always feel safe." Then you know we are helping. Maybe not all children are ready to receive help when they come to us, but our duty is to be here when they are ready. This philosophy became the fundamental principle of the organization, to be available for when people were ready to be helped without forcing or giving up. One of the most striking cases was that of Sophia, a 10-year-old girl who had spent 5 years in different shelters without ever being adopted. She arrived at the project distrustful and aggressive, rejecting any attempt at closeness. "She reminds me of you when you first arrived," Harrison commented to Caleb after the first meeting with Sophia. "That's true," Caleb agreed. "But I was cold and hungry. She's angry and afraid. They're different traumas. How do you think we should approach her case?" "By letting her decide when she's ready to be helped, and by showing that we'll be here when she decides." Caleb was right. Sophia needed 6 months of weekly meetings before she began to open up. During that period, Harrison and Caleb were simply present, offering activities, conversations, and above all, patience. "Why don't you give up on me?" Sophia asked one afternoon, after having been especially difficult during the session. "Why should we give up?" Caleb replied. "Because everyone gives up. They always give up." "We're not everyone," said Harrison. "We are people who know what it's like to feel lost and alone. And people like that don't give up on each other." That answer touched Sophia in a way she didn't expect. For the first time in years, she allowed someone to get emotionally close. Sophia's healing process was long and complex, but after a year, she had not only opened up to the possibility of being adopted, but had also helped Harrison and Caleb develop new techniques for working with traumatized children. "Sophia," said Caleb, on the day she met her future adoptive family, "do you have any advice for other children going through what you went through?" "Yes," she replied, now smiling easily. "Even when it seems like no one cares, there's always someone who does. Sometimes it just takes a little while for that person to show up." Sophia's adoption was a success, and years later she became a volunteer for the organization, helping other children in similar situations. But not all cases had a happy ending, and that weighed especially heavily on Caleb. "Dad," he said one evening after learning that a child they had worked with for months had run away from the shelter, "sometimes I feel like I'm failing these children." "Why do you feel that way?" "Because I got lucky. I found you at the right time, when I was ready to accept help. But some of these kids aren't ready, and they may never be. And I don't know how to help them." Harrison embraced his adoptive son, understanding the weight he carried. "Caleb, you can't save everyone. No one can. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying to save those we can." "But what about those we can't save?" "They still matter. Every attempt, even the ones that fail, plants a seed. Maybe that seed takes years to grow, but it's there, and one day when that child is ready, they'll remember that someone cared enough to try." This conversation helped Caleb find an emotional balance in his work. He learned to celebrate every success without blaming himself for the cases that didn't work out. As the years passed, the organization grew and became a national reference in therapeutic adoption. Harrison and Caleb were invited to give lectures, write articles, and consult for other similar organizations. "I never imagined that snowy afternoon would turn into all this," Harrison commented in an interview for a social work magazine. "What was the moment you realized you had developed something special?" asked the journalist. "It was when we realized we were no longer just helping orphan children and families who wanted to adopt," Caleb replied. "We were helping people connect with their own capacity to love and be loved." "That's very profound for someone so young," commented the journalist, surprised. "Life on the street teaches you a lot about human nature," Caleb explained. "You learn to see past appearances and understand what people really need." "And you, Mr. Harrison? What has this experience taught you about yourself?" "I learned that material wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with. And I learned that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places." He looked affectionately at Caleb. "If someone had told me 5 years ago that a street kid would become my son and my business partner, I'd have thought they were crazy." "Business partner?" "Yes," Harrison smiled. "Caleb is officially co-director of our organization. He has an understanding of emotional trauma that no college could teach." The journalist was impressed by the maturity and partnership between father and adoptive son. "What are your plans for the future?" "We want to expand our work to other states," Caleb answered, "and also develop prevention programs, working with at-risk families before children end up on the streets." "Is that preventative work?" "Exactly," Harrison agreed. It's easier to keep a family together than to rebuild lives after they've fallen apart. After the interview, father and son walked together through the mansion's garden as they did every afternoon. Caleb, are you happy with the life we've built together? Dad, I didn't know the word happiness before I came here. Now I not only know what it means, but I can teach other people how to find it too. And you don't miss the freedom you had on the street? Dad, freedom on the street is an illusion. You're free, but free for what? To go hungry, to be cold, to have no future. Here I have real freedom, the freedom to dream, to build, to make a difference in people's lives. Harrison smiled, proud of the man Caleb was becoming. And you, Dad? Don't you miss the simpler life you had before you found me? Caleb, my life before you wasn't simple. It was empty. I had money, I had comfort, but I had no purpose. You gave me the greatest gift one person can give another, a reason to wake up excited every day. At that moment, Sarah arrived with thrilling news. Dad, Caleb, I have a surprise for you. What is it? They both asked at the same time. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather and an uncle. The joy that swept over the family in that moment was indescribable. Harrison hugged his daughter, moved by the idea of becoming a grandfather. Caleb hugged his sister, moved by the idea of becoming an uncle. Our baby is going to grow up in a family where love has no limits, said Sarah. He'll have a grandfather who teaches about determination, an uncle who teaches about compassion, and a mother who learned about both by watching you. And he'll have a grandmother, Hattie, who will spoil him rotten, laughed Mrs. Hattie, who had appeared on the porch upon hearing the commotion. That night, the whole family gathered for dinner to celebrate the news. The table that for so many years had been occupied only by Harrison was now full of people who genuinely loved each other. You know, said Harrison, raising his glass for a toast, 5 years ago I was convinced my life was over. I was stuck in a wheelchair, stuck in bitterness, stuck in the past. And now? Asked Sarah. Now I know that wasn't the end of my life. It was just the end of a chapter, and the new chapter has been the greatest adventure I could imagine. To the new chapter, then, said Caleb, also raising his glass. To the new chapter. They all toasted together. Months later, when Sarah's baby was born, the family felt complete in a way none of them had anticipated. Little Noah, a name chosen in honor of the angel who had brought salvation to the family, was born healthy and surrounded by love. Look at that, said Caleb, holding his newborn nephew. He's going to grow up knowing from day one that he is loved. He'll never have to search for a family because he always had one. It's a big responsibility, remarked Sarah. Raising a child knowing she'll never go through the hardships you went through. It's not a big responsibility, corrected Harrison. It's a great privilege to be able to give him the childhood you and Caleb deserve to have. Dad, said Caleb, I wouldn't change a thing about my story. If I hadn't gone through the hardships I did, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I wouldn't have the ability to help other kids like I do. You're right, agreed Harrison. Our traumas, when overcome, become our strength to help others. And that philosophy became the motto of the organization they created, turning wounds into bridges. 5 years later, Noah was a happy and curious 5-year-old boy who loved hearing the stories of how his grandfather and his uncle met. Uncle Caleb, asked Noah one afternoon, do you still remember what it was like to live on the street? Yes, I remember, answered Caleb, but now those memories don't make me sad. They make me grateful. Grateful. Grateful for having gone through that and survived. Grateful for having found your grandfather, and grateful to be able to use that experience to help other people. And when I grow up, can I help too? Of course you can, smiled Caleb, but you'll help in your own way with your own experiences and talents. What are my talents? You're kind, you're curious, you're brave, and most importantly, you're growing up in a family where you've learned that love is the most powerful thing in the world. Noah hugged his uncle, happy with the answer. That evening, 3 generations of the family gathered in the garden to watch the sunset. Harrison, now with completely white hair, but still walking steadily. Caleb, now a young man of 22, with a degree in psychology and specializing in family therapy. Sarah, a dedicated mother and the administrative director of the organization. And Noah, representing the family's future. "Grandpa," said Noah, "tell me the story again of how you and Uncle Caleb met." "Again?" laughed Harrison. "I've told that story 1,000 times, but I like hearing it. It's my favorite story." Harrison looked at Caleb, who smiled and nodded. "All right. Once upon a time there was a very harsh winter. I was in a wheelchair, sad and alone in my big, cold mansion. And your uncle was a brave boy living on the streets, looking for a warm home. And he came to your gate and said, 'I'll make you walk in exchange for a warm home,'" finished Noah, who knew the story by heart. "That's right. And do you know what happened?" "What?" asked Noah, pretending not to know. "He managed to make me walk, but more than that, he managed to make our whole family walk toward a better life. And did they all live happily ever after?" "Not exactly," said Caleb. "We all live happily for now, because happiness isn't something that happens once and lasts forever. It's something we build every day, choosing to love each other even on the hard days." Noah thought about that for a moment. "Uncle Caleb, so is happiness like walking?" "How so?" "You have to take one step at a time every day, otherwise you stop." Caleb looked surprised at his 5-year-old nephew. "Noah, that is the smartest thing I've ever heard anyone say about happiness." "I learned it from you," smiled Noah. "You taught me that the most important things in life don't come ready-made. We have to build them." Harrison hugged his grandson, moved by his early insight into life. "Noah, one day you will help many people with that wisdom." "Like you help." "In your own way. Every person helps in the way they know how." That night, after Noah went to sleep, Harrison, Caleb, and Sarah stayed up talking about the future. "Dad," said Sarah, "have you ever thought about writing a book about your story?" "What for?" asked Harrison. "To inspire other people. To show that no matter how lost a person is, there is always hope." "It's an interesting idea," agreed Caleb, "but it would have to be an honest book. Not just about the successes, but also about the difficulties." "Exactly," said Sarah. "People need to know that healing isn't an easy or quick process, but it is possible." "And it would have to make clear that there's no magic formula," added Harrison. "Every person is unique. Every situation is unique." "But there is something universal," said Caleb. "The need we all have to feel important to someone." "That's the message of the book," smiled Sarah, "that everyone deserves to have someone who believes in them." They decided that night that they would write the book together, the 3 of them, each telling their perspective of the story. The book took 2 years to complete. Harrison wrote about the experience of losing hope and finding it again. Caleb wrote about growing up without a family and finding one. Sarah wrote about learning to trust her intuition and open her heart to unexpected changes. When the book was published, it became a national success. Thousands of people wrote to tell how the story had touched their lives. One of the most memorable letters came from a 70-year-old woman. "Dear Harrison, Caleb, and Sarah, I am 70 years old and have been a widow for 5. Since my husband passed, I have lived as Harrison did, isolated, bitter, convinced my life was over. After reading your book, I decided to leave my house and look for a way to help other people. I started as a volunteer at a children's shelter. Yesterday, an 8-year-old girl told me, 'Grandma Edith, you make my heart feel warm.' It was in that moment I understood what you meant about finding purpose through love. Thank you for reminding me it is never too late to start a new life. With love, Edith Miller." "Look at this," said Caleb, showing the letter to Harrison. "Our story is inspiring other people to find their own Caleb." "Or their own Harrison," smiled Harrison, "because sometimes people need to learn how to give help as much as how to receive it." The book's success brought speaking invitations all across the United States. Harrison and Caleb traveled together, telling their story and teaching about the principles of therapeutic adoption they had developed. "One question they always ask at the talks," Caleb commented during a trip, "is if I'm not angry at my birth parents for abandoning me." "And what is your answer?" "That I don't know their story. I don't know what difficulties they were facing, what impossible choices they had to make. Maybe abandoning me was the hardest decision of their lives. That's a very mature perspective. I learned from you that holding on to anger only hurts the one holding it. It's better to use that energy to build something good. At one of the talks, a young woman in her 20s approached them after the presentation. "Sorry to bother you," she said timidly, "but I wanted to thank you in person." "Thank us for what?" asked Harrison. "I was one of the children you helped get adopted 5 years ago. My name is Sophia." Caleb could hardly believe it. It was the aggressive, distrustful girl they had worked with at the beginning of the organization. "Sophia," Caleb exclaimed, "how are you?" "I'm good, really good. I finished high school, I'm in college for social work, and—" She hesitated. "I'm engaged." "How wonderful," said Harrison. "We are so proud of you. I'm the one who's grateful to you. If it weren't for the patience you had with me, I never would have learned to trust people. And without that trust, I never could have opened my heart to a family and then to love." "Sophia," said Caleb, "do you remember what I told you on the day you met your adoptive family? Of course, that there's always someone who cares even when it doesn't seem like it. And do you believe that now?" "Now I not only believe it, but I make a point of being that person for other children. I'm interning at an organization similar to yours." After Sophia said goodbye, Harrison and Caleb were moved. "You know what strikes me most about this whole story?" said Harrison. "What?" "It's seeing how a single decision can change not just one life, but multiple generations. If I hadn't let you in that afternoon, you wouldn't have become my son. Sophia wouldn't have been adopted. Hundreds of other children wouldn't have found families. And Noah wouldn't have an uncle," smiled Caleb. "And I wouldn't have learned that family isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to stay." That night at the hotel, they called home to talk to the family. "How was the talk?" asked Sarah. "Moving," answered Harrison. "We met Sophia. She's beautiful, studying, engaged, working with children." "That's great. And Noah?" "He's right here," said Sarah. "He wants to talk to you." "Hi, Grandpa. Hi, Uncle," shouted Noah on the phone. "I miss you." "We miss you too, champ," said Caleb. "What did you do today?" "I helped Mommy make cookies to take to the kids at the project. And I drew a really big house with lots of windows." "Why lots of windows?" asked Harrison, curious. "So the people inside can see the people outside who need help." Harrison and Caleb looked at each other, impressed once again by the child's wisdom. "Noah," said Caleb, "you have the most generous heart I know. I learned from you that a heart is like a house. The more people fit inside, the warmer it gets." After the call, father and adoptive son talked about how Noah was naturally developing values of compassion and solidarity. "He's going to make a difference in many people's lives," commented Harrison. "And the best part, he'll do it his own way, without traumas to overcome, without wounds to heal. He'll help people because he learned that helping is natural, not because he needed to be saved." "That's the difference between our generation and his," agreed Harrison. "We help because we were hurt and want to prevent others from feeling the same pain. He helps because he grew up seeing that helping others is a source of joy." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. In the years that followed, the organization founded by Harrison and Caleb expanded to 12 states in the United States. They developed a unique methodology that combined family therapy, emotional mentorship, and post-adoption follow-up. Noah, now 10 years old, was already showing interest in participating in the family's work. During school vacations, he spent time at the organization's headquarters, observing activities and talking with children in the adoption process. "Uncle Caleb," said Noah one of those afternoons, "why do some children take longer to trust people?" "Because each person has a different timeline for healing their wounds," explained Caleb. "Imagine you scraped your knee. Depending on the size of the scrape, it takes more or less time to heal. And the wounds of the heart? They're the same. Some are small and heal quickly. Others are deep and need more care and time. And how do we know when a heart wound is healing? When the person starts to trust again, to smile, to make plans for the future." Noah absorbed these conversations with a seriousness impressive for his age. One day he came home with a proposal that surprised the whole family. "Dad, Mom, Grandpa, Uncle," he said during dinner, "I have an idea." "What is it?" asked Harrison. What if we created a group just for children who have already been adopted, so they could talk among themselves about what it's like to adapt to a new family? The adults were impressed by the suggestion. "Noah, that's a brilliant idea," said Sarah. "How did you think of that?" "By talking with the children at the organization. Some told me that even after being adopted, they sometimes feel strange, like they don't truly belong to the new family." "And you think talking with other kids who went through the same thing would help?" "I think so, because when you see that other people felt the same things you did, it's easier to understand that it's normal." Caleb got up from his chair and hugged his nephew. "Noah, you just had an idea that could revolutionize our work." "Really? Really? We never thought about providing emotional support after adoption. We always focused on the before." "But it's obvious they need help afterward too," said Noah. "It's like learning to ride a bike. You don't stop needing balance after you learn." Harrison shook his head, amazed. "Noah, at 10 years old, you already understand things about human nature that many adults never learn." Noah's idea became one of the organization's most successful programs. Support groups for adopted children, facilitated by psychologists, but structured so the children themselves could share experiences and help each other. Sophia, who now worked as a social worker, volunteered to coordinate the program. "It's incredible," she commented to Caleb in a meeting, "to see how they open up to each other in a way they can't with adults." "It's the power of identification," explained Caleb. "When you know someone truly understands what you're going through, because they went through the same thing, it's easier to talk." "Like you and Harrison on that first day?" "Exactly. He saw in me someone who was lost like him. I saw in him someone who needed help like I did." Noah's program became so successful that it began to be replicated by other organizations across the United States. The boy, still in elementary school, was already being invited to give his opinion at adoption conferences. "Noah is becoming a kind of child consultant," Sarah Sterling joked in a conversation with her father and Caleb. "He has a unique perspective," said Harrison. "He grew up in a family born from adoption, but never needed to be adopted himself. He sees the process from the outside and the inside at the same time. And more importantly," Caleb added, "he has no traumas or emotional baggage that could interfere with his perception. He sees everything clearly." By this time, Harrison was already 60 years old, still healthy and active, but beginning to think about the organization's future. "Caleb," he said in a private conversation, "have you ever thought about taking over the organization's leadership completely?" "Why? Are you thinking about retiring?" "Not exactly, but I'm thinking about dedicating myself more to the educational side, giving more lectures, writing more, developing new programs." "And leaving the administrative part to me?" "Exactly. You already understand the work better than I do, and you have the trust of all the teams." Caleb was silent for a few moments, processing the proposal. "Dad, I accept, but on one condition." "What?" "That we continue working together. I don't want to take over alone. I want it to be a gradual transition, where I learn more and more and you get involved in a different way, but stay involved." "Perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking." The transition happened naturally over 2 years. Caleb progressively took on more administrative responsibilities, while Harrison dedicated himself more to developing new programs and the organization's external representation. Noah, now 12, created another innovation, a mentorship program where children who had been successfully adopted helped children who were at the beginning of the process. "The idea came to me when I remembered what Uncle Caleb told me about his first days here at home," explained Noah. "How he was afraid of not being accepted, of doing something wrong, of being sent away. And I thought that if he had talked to someone who had already been through that and succeeded, maybe he would have felt less anxious." "Noah," said Sophia, who now coordinated several of the organization's programs, "you have a natural gift for understanding people's emotional needs." "It's not a gift," replied Noah. "It's attention. When you really pay attention to what people say, they always tell you what they need." This observation from Noah became one of the fundamental principles of the organization's training. Listening attentively is the first and most important therapeutic tool. At 65, Harrison decided to write a second book, this time specifically focused on the lessons he had learned about late fatherhood. It's Never Too Late to Be a Father became a success among older men who were considering adoption or who would become fathers at an advanced age. "What surprises me most in the letters I receive from readers," Harrison commented to his family, "is how many men confess they were afraid they wouldn't have the energy or patience to be fathers after 50. "And how do you respond?" asked Sarah. "I tell them that energy and patience don't depend on age, they depend on purpose. When you have a strong reason to wake up every day, you find energy you didn't even know you had." "It's true," Caleb agreed. "You today at 65 have more stamina than many 20-year-olds. Because I know what my energy is for. I'm not just living, I'm building a legacy." "What kind of legacy?" asked Noah. "A legacy of love multiplied," replied Harrison. "Every child we help find a family will grow up knowing they deserve to be loved. And when those children become adults, they'll treat their own children the same way. It's a cycle of love that perpetuates itself." Noah grew thoughtful. "Grandpa, so when I grow up and have children, they'll also know they deserve love because I learned that here?" "Exactly. And their children too?" "Them too," Noah smiled. "Then our family will multiply forever, even after you're not here anymore." Harrison hugged his grandson, moved by the boy's deep understanding. "Noah, you've perfectly understood the true purpose of everything we do." At 15, Noah was already an articulate and mature teenager who actively participated in the organization's activities. He had created a YouTube channel where he interviewed successful adoptive families, demystifying prejudices and showing the positive reality of adoption. "Uncle Caleb," he said one afternoon, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to study in college. And have you reached any conclusion?" "I want to study psychology, like you. But I also want to study communications." "Why communications?" "Because I've realized one of the biggest problems with adoption in the United States is the lack of information. People have prejudices because they don't know real stories. They don't know how the process really works." "And you want to change that?" "I do. Imagine if every American family knew stories like ours. How many children would find families?" Caleb was proud of the broad vision Noah was developing. "That's an excellent idea. You could specialize in social communications focused on humanitarian causes." "Exactly. And I can use everything I've learned here at the organization as a practical foundation." Harrison, who had been listening to the conversation, approached. "Noah, are you thinking of taking over the organization in the future?" "Not exactly, Grandpa. I'm thinking of expanding the concept, creating a communications platform that promotes not just adoption, but all forms of family based on love." "How so?" "Adoptive families, families that care for the elderly, families that take in people in vulnerable situations, showing that family isn't just about sharing the same blood." Harrison and Caleb looked at each other, impressed by the teenager's maturity and social vision. "Noah," said Harrison, "you're proposing to revolutionize the concept of family in the United States." "Why not?" smiled Noah. "You revolutionize the lives of hundreds of children. I can try to revolutionize the mindset of millions of people." That night, the whole family gathered to discuss Noah's ideas. Sarah, now 40 years old, and the organization's executive director, was excited about the possibilities. "Noah, you could create a communications network that connects all the adoption organizations in the country," she suggested. "A portal where interested people could find information, inspiring stories, statistical data, and also a space for adoptive families to connect," added Sophia, who was participating in the meeting. "A place where they can exchange experiences and support each other." "I like the idea," said Noah, "but I want it to be more than just a regular social network. I want it to be an educational platform that really changes how the United States sees adoption." Caleb smiled at Harrison. "Remember when I arrived here at 12, not even knowing how to read properly? Look how far we've come." "And this is just the beginning," replied Harrison. "Noah is going to take our work to a level we never dreamed possible." The conversation went on late into the night, with the whole family contributing ideas for Noah's future project. It was evident the teenager had inherited not only the family's sense of compassion, but also Harrison's entrepreneurial vision and Caleb's psychological intuition. "One thing I'm sure of," said Noah before going to sleep, "no matter what career path I choose, it will always be about creating more connections of love between people." "Why are you so sure of that?" asked Sarah. "Because I grew up seeing that love is the only thing in the world that, the more you share, the more you have." And with that wise phrase, Noah summed up the entire philosophy that had guided his family since that snowy afternoon 15 years earlier, when a brave boy offered to make a businessman walk in exchange for a warm home. The end. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe love can truly overcome any difficulty? Share your own stories of overcoming in the comments, and don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.